research on it, not enough. So, are you now ready, Malcolm?
Absolutely. So, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Malcolm Allitt. Just to give you a little introduction to me, like Tony, I work part of the time in a business school, or two different business schools. But I've also been a general manager or managing director of a couple of quite big companies in construction. I've also been and am an entrepreneur, so I have a share in a business which designs and builds bookbinding machines, and I've also been a director, both a non-executive and an executive director. So I'm not quite sure, maybe I can wear all of those hats, that's my idea. But my particular interest in recent years has been about value creation and where value comes from in organisations. So Tony said to me, please can you talk about finance and governance? Well, maybe, but I've got my own ideas, so I hope that's going to be.
I expect nothing less of you, sir.
I hope that's going to be fine. Because when I started looking through a draft of Tony's book, and like others of you starting to hear about this, I started thinking about where do organisations start and what happens to them next as they go through the various growing pains. And for me, that's the most interesting part. And I did say I started out at a business school, so of course I've got my own little 2x2 matrix over there. I was thinking, well, okay, if we're talking about finance and government, keep an eye on me, Jenny. This is so this is a far from formed model, but I was thinking about, well, when new companies start, they're really down here. Their value creation is all based on a single idea, normally. Everything is bet on a single idea. So that's what I mean by an undiluted approach. Everything is in one pot. What kind of governance do they have? Definitely extremely weak. In the end, the best companies get up here. Well, I think what we probably know is, I'll just put relatively, they might have relatively strong governance, but the other aspect of these companies is that their value creation model is diluted. At any one time, they're trying different product ideas, different channels, mixtures of products and services. So they're in a very different position. I want to concentrate mainly on this one, so let me start with established companies and get those out of the way. I would agree with Tony completely that the horizon for companies these days is much, much shorter than they used to be. And I was thinking of a model that came from Gary Hamel in the mid-1990s, a strategy model, and he talked about three types of companies: the rule makers, the rule takers, and the rule breakers. And what we've seen over the last 25 years is that rule breakers and people making best use of emerging technologies have come to dominate industries and pushed away established organisations like Pan Am and all those others that you had on your list this morning. So typically up here, once these companies are established, they are the old rule makers. Sometimes they're rule takers, but they're very seldom the rule breakers. So in a way, what they're doing is safe as long as the environment around them doesn't change dramatically. Obviously, things can go horribly wrong. I was thinking about IBM. You know, there used to be a saying when I was a boy that nobody ever got sacked for buying IBM, you know, as their computer system. Well, you know, look at what IBM did. They completely missed the boat. And if they hadn't had very deep pockets, they wouldn't have been able to survive. And it's been interesting that a lot of the debate has been about the extent to which you can predict unforeseen emergencies and circumstances. But I wanted to just think for a minute or two about governance. And the governance system for established companies usually is, first of all, there's a responsibility of the executive directors to act in a proper way and in the interests of the shareholders. The next level up is non-executive directors, who are supposed to make sure that the executive directors and the organisation is doing a proper job. And then above that, there's the auditors, who work on behalf of the shareholders. Now, having been both an executive director and even more a non-executive director, what struck me is the management is able to filter the information that they give you. So I think that the job of being a non-executive director is almost impossible. And a friend of mine who was a partner at Price Waterhouse, or whatever they are these days, Price Waterhouse Coopers, she said, actually she's a senior partner there, and she said, well, everybody's saying, please would you come and be a non-executive director? She said, I won't do it, it's too dangerous, too risky, you know, you just don't know what's going to happen. So it seems to me that governance isn't, if we mean governance in the traditional sense, isn't quite the right thing. What we're talking about is the systems and the sort of broader use of the word governance. So I'd be interested to see what Tony thinks about that. Am I incompetent? Yes. So where I wanted to go though was to talk a little bit about new businesses, and it's the small and medium-sized enterprises that actually make up the body of the economic engine in the country, a big part of it. And if you speak to venture capitalists or people in private equity, what they'll say is that, well, I mean, first of all, the sorts of people that want to do this kind of thing, they are absolutely believing in their idea. They've probably come from that industry, they can see how it can be done better, they're probably very good networkers. There's some intrinsic anti-fragileness about entrepreneurs. They're very close to the customer, absolutely everything is invested. So actually, you don't need to worry about entrepreneurs in the very first stages. It's how they get away from that to become big companies that seems to me to be the problem. Of course, these companies, and I've been in this situation myself, the resource squeeze is massive. This idea, the very notion of building in any kind of redundancy or 25% slack, frankly, it's just not going to happen. Absolutely everything is focused on surviving, and particularly keeping the revenue stream going. So, quite a tough time for these companies. Now, what private equity people will say to you in private, if not in public, is out of every 10 ventures that they invest in, there'll be one star, there'll be one fairly successful company that emerges after a couple of years. There'll be one that falls by the wayside very, very quickly, and there'll be one that fails within 2 years. But the other 6 limp along. Psst, my organisation is one of those. We've been going 15 years. We turn over about 4 million a year. Almost every year we lose money. The Walking Dead are constantly in this situation of not having enough resource. They can just about survive. Do we have risk systems in place? Do we give any thought to it at all? Is it on the agenda at board meetings? Absolutely not. We do, it doesn't get touched at all. We know we should, but we don't. So the 6 Walking Dead, how do we get those into the next phase? That would be interesting. Some companies do succeed. They have a good idea, they execute it well, and then they can start to move, somehow migrate from here into here. And before I came along this morning, I was thinking, well, yeah, okay, so is it a case of they find a clockwise route where they start having more products and services, but they're still weak, and then they develop some strong governance and systems, or do they come this way round, which is probably not going to be their natural inclination of the sorts of people who are entrepreneurs, develop their stronger governance systems before they do too much of this. But I think governance, by now, I think governance and anti-fragility are actually completely separate ideas. So I think that's perhaps a little bit of a red herring. I would say that actually most companies that get from here to here do it by luck. Then if they keep surviving over a long period of time, they put in place proper systems. So I just came up with a few thoughts here of, first of all, what is our challenge? Tony suggested that perhaps this little community here might become evangelists for these new ideas of helping organisations to become anti-fragile and to put effort and thought and resources into that. So I think our challenge is that, first of all, managers are not philosophers. I mean, don't you think everything we've heard this morning sounds kind of complicated? It's quite difficult. I'm fearful that in these smaller organisations, which are hard pressed, managers are going to be saying, yeah, well, fine. So I wonder what our evangelist message is going to be. And I've just got a couple of thoughts there. What we focused on particularly is risk. But of course, the best organisations have their tentacles out there and are developing themselves in such a way that they can be the first into new opportunities. And I think we should perhaps think about couching the message in terms of opportunity. So I think this is largely about simplifying and packaging the method in a way, or the whole idea in a way that's going to be palatable to small and medium-sized enterprises, for me. So for me, a goal personally would be, if we could get from this 262, so this is 2 winners, 6 walking dead, 2 absolute losers, if we could only get to 3 companies that make it across the great divide to being a robust, stronger companies, that would be brilliant. In other words, if we could just work on 1 startup out of 10, then we would add 50% to the overall rate at which we develop great companies that have a future. If we could do that, then I think we would have made a difference. Probably that's contributed to the controversy rather than added much clarity, but that's where my thinking has been this morning, and as Tony asked me to think about this.
Okay. Absolutely.
Thank you.